Breaking. In a stunning intervention, King Charles has openly condemned Britain's opposition leaders, warning that the very future of the country is now at stake. Subscribe now to stay ahead on Britain's fast-moving political crisis. In an extraordinary escalation, the monarch, traditionally bound by convention to remain politically neutral, has delivered what some are calling his most blistering rebuke yet. Sources from Buckingham Palace confirm that Charles privately and publicly clashed with opposition leaders over their handling of the ongoing national upheaval, sparking headlines, frantic party meetings, and a wave of speculation about whether the monarchy itself is shifting into dangerous territory. This is not just a royal spat. This is the king stepping into the arena of raw political conflict. The sequence began quietly behind closed doors. Late last week, senior opposition figures from Labour, the Liberal Democrats, and the SNP were invited to a high-level audience at Clarence House. Initially billed as a routine consultation, a long-standing tradition between the sovereign and party leaders, the meeting reportedly escalated when Charles confronted them about what he described as paralysis in Parliament and dangerous neglect of the British people's trust. Witnesses told journalists that the King's language was unusually sharp, warning of fractures that could tear the United Kingdom apart. Opposition leaders left visibly tense, some refusing to answer questions as cameras flashed outside the gates. Within hours, the whispers had spread. By the next morning, it was splashed across broadsheets and trending across social platforms. The monarch had broken through the wall of neutrality, and the entire establishment was rattled. The Prime Minister's office remained conspicuously silent, but inside Parliament the reaction was electric. Conservative MPs, eager to seize the moment, praised the king for speaking hard truths. Opposition figures accused him of overstepping. And yet the public, weary of gridlock, scandals and economic decline, seemed to be listening more to Charles than to their elected officials. Pollsters began testing the question within hours. Should the monarch intervene more directly when the political system fails? Early results were shocking. A YouGov flash poll showed 42% in support, 35% opposed, and the rest undecided. What unfolded across the next 48 hours felt less like politics as usual and more like a constitutional crisis in slow motion. Senior Labour officials scrambled to draft a statement distancing themselves from what they called regrettable overreach. And the Liberal Democrats accused the king of sacrificing neutrality. Nicola Sturgeon's successor in the SNP doubled down, suggesting Charles had misjudged Scotland's mood entirely. But in England, ordinary citizens began uploading clips to TikTok and Twitter praising the king's courage and plain speaking. One clip showing a pensioner outside a Leeds market saying, "Finally, someone's told them off," gathered over 1.2 million views within a single day. The evidence of this backlash is undeniable. In the Midlands, local party activists reportedly cancelled constituency surgeries, fearing a storm of angry voters. Hashtags like "the king is right" and "Parliament failed" trended for 72 hours. For a brief moment, Britain's most stable institution, the monarchy, appeared to outshine its most unstable one, Westminster. But as the tide grew, so did the danger. Legal scholars lined up across media panels to remind the public that the king's role is constitutional. The evidence suggests both realities may be true. On one hand, Charles has put the monarchy at the centre of a political firestorm. On the other, he has tapped into a vein of frustration that no party leader has managed to capture. And therein lies the paradox. Reactions inside Labour's headquarters reveal the strain. Leaked memos show a scramble to reassert authority and to pivot the narrative back to policy. Sources say shadow cabinet members openly argued about whether to denounce the king directly or to downplay the confrontation. The Lib Dems went further, drafting a motion of protest for conference season. The SNP turned the episode into fuel for their independence campaign, arguing that Charles had proven Scotland's grievances were ignored even by the Crown, not executive. Professors of law warned of a slippery slope. Once a monarch becomes a player, neutrality dies, and the social contract begins to fray. Meanwhile, former prime ministers entered the fray. Tony Blair issued a carefully worded statement, saying Charles was right to voice concern privately, but wrong to make those views public. Theresa May, usually restrained, surprised Westminster insiders by remarking, "This shows how dangerously brittle our politics has become." The intervention from past leaders only intensified the storm, giving journalists wall-to-wall coverage. The timeline is critical here. Monday, The closed-door confrontation. Tuesday, leaks to the press. Wednesday, poll shock and social media eruption. Thursday, party crisis meetings. By Friday, the king himself was forced to issue a clarifying statement through a palace spokesperson. The message insisted that Charles's comments had been misinterpreted, stressing his deep respect for parliamentary processes. Yet the wording left much to be desired. Analysts noted what was absent. There was no outright denial that he had slammed opposition leaders. The damage was done. Across Britain's pubs, offices and households, the debate raged. Had the king overstepped? Or had he simply voiced what millions were already thinking? Public reactions poured in. Ipsos released a poll showing generational divides. Among voters over 55, 60% approved of Charles's comments. Among those under 35, only 27% approved. The monarchy, once seen as unifying, was now being torn apart along the same fault lines, splitting Britain politically. Scholars call this a stress test of the unwritten constitution. It reveals how fragile the balance really is when convention collides with crisis. And what of the Prime Minister? For days, Number 10 maintained silence, but under mounting pressure, Downing Street finally issued a tepid statement. His Majesty is entitled to his private views. The government continues to focus on delivering for the people. It was a non-answer that only raised more questions. Was the government secretly pleased by the King's intervention, seeing it as a blow against their rivals, or were they terrified of precedent? The consequences now stretch far beyond a single clash. Analysts outline 3 scenarios. First, the controversy dies down, swept under the carpet, leaving only scars in political memory. Second, the monarchy becomes a recurring actor in moments of crisis, redefining its role for a generation. Third, and most explosive, this sparks a constitutional showdown, fueling calls for reform, republicanism, or even abolishment of the monarchy altogether. Already, petitions demanding clarity of monarchy's role have attracted over 120,000 signatures online. Universities report spikes in student debates on republicanism. Bookmakers even adjusted odds on Britain holding a referendum on the monarchy within the next decade, cutting them from 20-1 to 12-1. And yet, Charles himself may not retreat. Those close to the king insist he has always viewed his reign as one of active duty. Unlike his mother, Elizabeth II, who kept her counsel, Charles has long expressed views on the environment, architecture and public welfare. The question now, is he willing to risk it all by reshaping the monarchy into a speaking institution rather than a silent one? Britain stands at a crossroads, a monarch who speaks out, an opposition under siege, a public split in half. The cracks in the old consensus are widening and nobody seems able to contain them. In the bigger picture, this crisis is not really about one meeting or one clash. It is about the exhaustion of a political system that no longer commands trust, colliding with an institution that has survived by staying above the fray. If that institution now descends into the chaos, the long-term stability of Britain could be at stake. The stakes are immense. Will Charles be remembered as the monarch who saved Britain from paralysis, or the monarch who destroyed the last pillar of neutrality? For viewers, this moment demands vigilance. Britain is rewriting its own rules before our eyes. The next months could determine not just the future of political parties, but the survival of the monarchy itself. The storm did not simply fade with the weekend papers. By the following Monday, a new wave of scrutiny engulfed every political talk show and radio phone-in across the country. Callers flooded the airwaves, with one programme on LBC reporting that they had received more than 3 times their usual volume of calls, nearly all referencing the King's remarks. Some callers argued the monarch had finally voiced the frustration of a public let down by years of scandals and austerity. Others worried that once the monarchy openly sides with or against elected leaders, Britain could tumble into constitutional chaos. The sheer volume of public engagement made clear this was not going away. Political journalists began digging deeper into the meeting itself. Accounts varied, but multiple sources confirmed that Charles had used the word dereliction when referring to the opposition's failure to present a credible vision for government. That single word ricocheted through Westminster, becoming the headline in countless opinion columns. Was this a monarch merely admonishing politicians, or was this a monarch declaring them unfit? Even the distinction mattered little. Perception was enough to ignite panic. Labour officials privately fumed. One shadow cabinet member, speaking anonymously, called it an ambush orchestrated by palace insiders eager to remind us who really holds the symbolic cards. The Liberal Democrats, still recovering from their weak showing in recent by-elections, framed the clash as proof that the king himself was sounding the alarm about the state of democracy. SNP figures turned the remarks into a rallying cry, saying, "If Westminster is failing and the Crown is now chastising us, why should Scotland cling to this broken union?" Within nationalist circles, Charles's rebuke was reframed as evidence that Scotland's grievances had reached even the ears of the monarchy. The scale of the fallout shocked even seasoned analysts. Within 10 days of the confrontation, a survey from Ipsos Mori suggested that 51% of Britons now believed the monarchy should play some role in holding politicians to account. That was a stunning reversal of decades of sentiment. For context, just 5 years ago, only 28% supported such an idea. Something had shifted. Commentators across television and print called it a watershed moment. The BBC's flagship political programme invited a panel of historians who argued that Charles had effectively broken an unwritten rule dating back to the Glorious Revolution, that monarchs reign but do not rule. One historian pointed out that even Edward VIII, infamous for his controversial stances, had never so openly condemned the functioning of opposition leaders. Another reminded viewers that Britain's entire democratic experiment rests on conventions, fragile agreements about who speaks and who stays silent. Once those agreements are broken, they rarely mend easily. Inside Downing Street, tension mounted. Cabinet ministers reportedly debated whether to encourage the king to issue a stronger clarification. Some feared that silence might embolden him, or worse, embolden future monarchs. Others argued that any attempt to restrain the king would look weak, even authoritarian. The Prime Minister himself kept an unusually low profile, appearing at only 2 scheduled public events during this period, offering no comments about the affair. That silence spoke volumes. Was it deference, was it calculation, or was it simple paralysis? While Westminster wavered, the public debate intensified. Universities held emergency forums. Law faculties suddenly found their constitutional law lectures packed with students eager to debate monarchy and democracy. The Guardian published an editorial arguing that Charles's intervention, though reckless, reflects a dangerous truth. Britain's political institutions are no longer trusted to self-correct. The Telegraph, in contrast, ran with a king for the people, praising Charles as a figure finally connecting with ordinary Britons in a way Parliament had failed to. The polarity of the coverage mirrored the polarity of the nation. Then came the street demonstrations, small but symbolic. Groups of citizens gathered outside Parliament Square holding placards reading, "The King is right," alongside others declaring, "Silence the Crown." These were not massive rallies, but their presence underscored how quickly the debate had spilled from elite circles into public squares. Television news replayed the images on loop. The juxtaposition of monarchist supporters and Republican protesters separated by just a few yards of pavement. For a nation accustomed to royal weddings and jubilees, the sight of political protest focused directly on the king was jarring. Social media continued to amplify the fissures. On TikTok, the pensioners' viral clip continued to spread, gaining nearly 3 million views in total. On Twitter, prominent influencers, comedians, and even former athletes weighed in, some mocking the king, others applauding him. One satirical tweet, "Charles for PM," racked up 500,000 likes in under 24 hours. It was a joke, but also a signal. The king had, for the first time in modern history, crossed into the realm of popular political discourse. Meanwhile, within the monarchy itself, courtiers reportedly debated how to contain the fallout. Buckingham Palace aides were said to be split. One camp believed that silence would allow the issue to fade, while another urged a televised address to reaffirm neutrality. But insiders admitted privately that Charles is not his mother. Elizabeth II's strength lay in silence, her capacity to weather storms by refusing to speak. Charles has spent decades cultivating a voice on issues ranging from architecture to climate change. Now, in the throne, that voice cannot be so easily muted. The broader consequences loom large. Legal scholars warn that if Charles continues down this path, Britain could see challenges to the monarchy's role in the courts. Parliamentary committees may demand formal clarification of royal powers. The opposition parties, though weakened by the rebuke, could seize the chance to push for codifying constitutional rules, something Britain has long resisted. And hovering over all of it is the spectre of republicanism, once a fringe debate, now inching into mainstream conversation. Internationally, the ripples are felt too. Foreign media from Washington to Paris framed the story as a sign of Britain's democratic malaise. In Australia and Canada, Republicans seized on the news to argue that their nations should sever ties with the monarchy. One Australian columnist bluntly wrote, "If the king interferes in UK politics, why should he be head of state here?" The story became not just about Britain, but about the Commonwealth, raising questions about the monarchy's global future. For the British public, the crisis has become both entertainment and existential debate. Polling shows that trust in Parliament remains near record lows, yet trust in the monarchy has also begun to slip. In the latest Ipsos poll, approval of Charles fell from 61% to 48% in just 2 weeks. While many admired his candour, many more worried about the breach of neutrality. The monarchy's strength has always been its ability to stand above politics, to serve as a symbol rather than a participant. If that changes, what remains? And so Britain now faces a paradox. A king who speaks risks eroding the very institution he seeks to defend. A king who stays silent risks appearing irrelevant at a moment of national crisis. Opposition leaders, weakened by the rebuke, must decide whether to fight back against the monarch's intervention or attempt to move on quietly. The government, caught in the middle, can neither openly rebuke the crown nor fully embrace it without consequences. The stage is set for months of uncertainty, every misstep amplified, every silence scrutinised. In the end, this is not just a story about Charles, Labour or Westminster. It is a story about the fragile nature of Britain's unwritten constitution, about a nation weary of political dysfunction, and about an institution that has survived for centuries precisely because it refused to play the game. If that refusal is now gone, then Britain may indeed be entering uncharted waters. The ultimate question remains, will history remember King Charles as the monarch who broke the rules to save a broken politics, or the monarch who dragged the crown into the swamp of partisanship? Either way, the future of Britain may hinge on what happens next. Subscribe now for every twist in this unfolding crisis and tell us in the comments, should the king speak out or should he stay silent?